Hello YouTube, this is Russ Goslin. Got another basic video for beginner modelers, and maybe modelers who are intermediate to advanced might learn a few things that they haven't learned before. It happens to me quite often watching YouTube videos with other model builders and other magazines. And so here we are. We're going to talk about puttying. Our last video was discussed, what did we talk about? Blades and X-Acto knives. So I think the next step in the model building process is working with putty and fillers. Now, can you build a model as a beginner without putty? Absolutely. My first models, I don't think I used any putty at all. I just built them and had fun. So I always want to stress having fun with model building. But I think model building tends to, as you get into it, you want to, there's a certain taste. You want to get more detail orientated. So I'm just going to talk about some of the three basic putties that I use. Now, these three basic putties that I use, there's dozens of companies that make putties on the market right now. Many. So I think in your modeling journey, you're going to find what putty works for you. I'm just sharing three examples of what I generally use right now. A year from now, I might be using something totally different. And that's just the modeling journey. You find new tools, and you take the ones that work for you, and the ones that don't, you just put them on the shelf. So here we go. Puttying. I do mostly armored fighting vehicles, though I do have some planes and ships that I want to work on. But there's another category, or something to think about with putty, is different model genres. I think you're going to have different situations and uses for putty. Shipbuilders may use putty for different things. Car builders for also different things. As armored fighting vehicle kind of guy, I find myself using putty quite a lot. There's a lot of things that come into play. There's ejection pin marks, there's holes that come in from early manufacturers such as Tamiya, where some of their early kits, they were remote controlled, had a little battery holder, and you could had a little motor. So a lot of those holes are in the chassis or hull, and they need to be filled. So I'm going to talk about the Tamiya putty. I've been using this quite often. I'm pretty happy with the results that I've been getting. It's one of the drawbacks I have to it is that it does shrink in the drying process. So you will have some sinkholes possibly, and usually I just give it a brief sanding and I come in with a second coat, and that usually takes care of the problem. What do I do? You can thin this putty with a lacquer thinner, or I also use liquid cement, depending on how thick I want my putty to be. Sometimes you just have some surface lines that need to be filled, maybe some scratches, and you can control the amount of thinning by how much or how little you use of these different ways of thinning. Using the lacquer thinner, you're going to get it really thin. It can be almost like paint, and you can just use a paintbrush and go right over your seam. The liquid cement, it's going to be a little thicker, so maybe for some thicker seam lines. And I will just say that once you start adding these pieces to the ingredients, your putty is going to dry a lot faster. So that's just a word of caution. And also, you can just use the putty alone without any kind of thinning. And what can you use to apply it? Well, you can go buy stuff at the hobby shop, tools. I know a lot of magazines talk about dental tools. A lot of dentists throw away their old tools after so many months or years, and they toss them. Those work good. There's nothing like a little piece of styrene or cardboard or anything. Even a toothpick can be used. I even got some scrap cardboard pieces that I use. Anything, as long as you just get it on. So that's the basic Tamiya putty. Secondly, I'm going to go into Milliput, which is really great. It's a two-part epoxy. I got the two pieces right here. All you gotta do is cut what you need, bring them together, and knead it like bread dough until it all comes out uniform, and use it for all sorts of things. This is for larger projects. I really don't use it for seams as much as I use it for filling major holes. Also, you can probably use it for sculpting. I don't really do too much, but definitely in the wargaming category, there's a lot of people who sculpt all sorts of interesting gadgets and maybe even like appendages for characters and things. Though in the military model building, also you can use this kind of stuff for sculpting backpacks and bedrolls. Lately I've been seeing a lot of model builders, they'll flatten this out with a roller between wax paper and make blankets and tarps and things, which is something I haven't done yet, but maybe in the future I'm going to start tinkering with it. Okay, I hope I haven't lost you yet. One point, it is an epoxy, and you can go to a local hardware store and get plumber's epoxy. I used that in the beginning of my modeling journey, and I don't recommend it because it really dries super hard, and you're going to need dynamite to do any kind of shaping or molding with it once it's dry. You'll be sanding for a lifetime, it seems. So I don't recommend using any kind of plumber's putty epoxy, even though you might think it does the same thing, but it doesn't. And even Milliput has different types of, this is the yellow gray, they have a white, and they all have different textures when you sand it. And again, you'll find out what you need and try it. So I got that. And my last putty is the Tamiya green putty. I don't use it too much. I think when I first started model building, this was the putty that seemed to be everywhere, and at every hobby shop there was the green putty. I like it for certain things, not so much filling holes and seams. What happens is I've been finding that over time when it dries, if it's really thick, it tends to crack. And that's just been kind of a pain. Mostly what I use this for is for texture surfaces, such as this tank turret I have here. This goes to a Tamiya's Matilda tank. This is the vintage one, not the latest reissue. But in this case, the green putty works as a way of replicating the cast steel turret. This would have been, when it was being manufactured in England, the real tank would have been cast as opposed to rolled steel. And so if you look closely at tanks in pictures, or maybe if there's one in your town square, I know I've seen a few in my lifetime, you get really close, you're going to see that it's not a very smooth surface, and it's got texture to it. And so I applied this by thinning it with liquid cement, and then using a flat stiff brush, just making stipple effect, just kind of stippling it so that it gives you some contour. And again, you can regulate the texture by how much thinner you use. I probably used a bit too much, so I have to be very careful with my sanding to not ruin the effect that I got here. So that's pretty much green putty. Also the classic model building people I looked up to as a kid, you know, they would use it for texturing Zimmermann on German tanks. I've done it a few times with various results. Lately I have been kind of getting lazy. I'll go and buy some resin or brass. But I would recommend, if you want to try Zimmermann, I still think using putty for making Zimmermann probably has the best realism, because you can crack it and chip it at your will, as opposed to buying the resin or brass pieces, which are already made right there and you can't do too much about it. So we talked about green putty, basic type, and Milliput. I just want to give an example of how it's used, the basic type. I got a project I'm working on. This is a HU-5 Wessex helicopters from Italeri, 1/75th scale. And I just want to give you, hope you can see it on the camera, but I just wanted to cover up some of these really fine seams. And you can see that, you're trying to use a thicker putty, you're not going to get close detail as you would using a liquefied putty form. And all I did was apply it with a paintbrush and just kind of go over it. And you can get this putty to be really nice and smooth, and it almost comes on like paint. And all I gotta do now is just do some sanding, and with some very fine sandpaper. I'll talk about sandpaper in a later video, and that just looks really nice. Secondly, on the same model, I got some ejection pin marks, and this is where puttying really comes into play. Is that this interior is going to be exposed, the door will be open, and I wanted to eliminate some of these ejection pin marks. And I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it did dry and it did shrink a bit, contracted, and so I'll have to use a second coat, and that won't be too big of a deal. On the reverse side, I had some holes to remove. In this case, they were a little bigger, a little deeper, so I just used some Milliput putty and filled it in. And this won't shrink or contract, it's just going to be lock solid hard. And all you gotta do is take some fine sandpaper, sand it nice and smooth and flush with your panel line, and you'll be all set. Another example before I wrap up is just kind of what I was talking about. This is the Matilda hull, and you can see the battery labeling for the positive negatives for the battery. This is very vintage. You can see it says 1973 on the hull, and these came with holes where you could turn switches and things. And for model building, you just want to remove that. So what I did is I took some plastic styrene, sealed it up with and glued it. That way when I pack the putty in, it's got something to pack into. And on the reverse side you can see where the holes were, and I still gotta do some more sanding to get it nice and smooth, and that's gonna look really good. On the reverse you can see I got some more styrene issues, a lot of holes that I need to fill, and I'm just gonna pack it with Milliput and then sand it smooth. This kit certainly had a lot of problems. I'm glad they reissued this kit and retooled the molding. And also, I don't know if you can see the drive wheels, there's a lot of putty work here where these plates did not align in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I had to stuff styrene wedges into here and then coat it with putty and sand it. Luckily it's a Matilda tank and it's going to have a nice panel that's going to cover all this up, so I'm not too worried about it. So that's it for the putty and surface type stuff. Again, this is not an exhaustive video on putty, it's just some basic stuff that you're going to run into with building military tanks in this case. Again, shipbuilding, airplane fuselages, those are going to ask for different techniques with putty, but the basics are all pretty much right here. And so probably what I'll do is my next video I'll probably go into actually filling in some holes so that you can get a better idea of what I've been talking about. So I thank you for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. Please go and check out other YouTubers who work with models. There's certainly dozens on YouTube, and they also have a lot of things that I may have not talked about at any length, and they may have other methods or types of putties and fillers that I haven't talked about which could be beneficial to you. So again, this is Russ Goslin. I thank you for watching. I hope everything is going well with your models, and I will see you again sometime soon. Thank you, and goodbye.